Hello, everyone, and welcome back to day 2 of commsHERO Week 2022. So we all hope you enjoyed yesterday's sessions, which was a great day, took away some great insights and some great learnings, and I'm ready for another day of some wonderful presentations with some wonderful speakers. So my name is Dominic. I'll be assisting with some presentations this morning, but first of all, I just wanted to go for a few housekeeping notes. So like yesterday, we'll have questions answered at the end of the session. If you'd like to put them in the Q&A tab, which you can find next to the chat tab on the right-hand side of your screen, and then we will be able to answer those at the end. Always, as well, we want to encourage you to join the commsHERO game. So currently we have Annie Cooper leading the way with a staggering 2,210 points. So who can beat Annie? That really is the question, I guess. And then we also have if you share some photos on social using the hashtag commsHERO, you can also win some prizes as well. So get sharing on social, of course. But also like to say a massive thank you to our sponsors for making this event possible. But without further ado, let me move on to the first session of the day, which is Measure What You Treasure. We have Dan Holden and Caroline Cubbon-King. How are you both?
Marvelous.
Yeah, really good. Thank you, Dominic.
Wonderful. So, communication consultant from all things IC. Dan is worked in a variety of sectors, including aviation, defence, charity, and more recently manufacturing, or which have seen him support remote-based colleagues. And then with Caroline, creative and experienced communicator with many years under her belt as an in-house comms leader. Strategic comms, reputation management, and internal communication are her bread and butter. I will let them crack away with their presentation. Go ahead, guys.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dom. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Already amazing to see people from all over the globe, Sudan and UK, so lovely to be here. As Dom said, you've got myself and Caroline from All Things IC delivering this session on Measure What You Treasure. Just to let you know, throughout this session, there's going to be a couple of questions we're going to ask to get your responses for. And I'm sure you'll all be delighted to know we have some stationery up for grabs. So what we'll be looking for throughout today is your post from this session of something that you've taken away or really resonated with you. And later on this afternoon, we'll be choosing one lucky person at random from all those tweets to win some fab All Things IC stationery. Please do ask questions as we go. There is only a half hour, so what we will do after today is have a look through anything we didn't cover, and then we'll do a blog either later this week or early next week for you, some of our thoughts around those questions. So if we don't get a chance to come back to you, fear not, we will be doing a blog to capture. So without further ado, what is today about? We are going to go through the wonderful subject of measurement. And for those of you that are a Candid Comms podcast listener, you might be familiar with these, but we hope we're going to leave you with one thing to know, one thing to do, and one thing to think about when it comes to internal communication measurement. We are all about sharing and giving you hopefully skills, knowledge that you can take away and practically apply in your organizations, maybe even your agencies, wherever you are. So like I say, love to see the chat as we go. Just a prompt, if you see a pencil appear in any of the slides today, be on standby with those keyboards to enter into the chat. If you're watching this on catch up, I'd encourage you just to make notes and thoughts in your notebooks as it's all relevant. And we'd love to hear after as well. Do tag us in any posts of takeaways that you have for today. So I've got first up question just to warm us up on the start of day 2 of commsHERO. Keen to know, when we say measurement to you, what feelings jump to mind? What comes to the forefront of your mind when we start to say measurement with internal comms? Keen to see what people are feeling around the subject of measurement. So feel free to pop them in the chat. Thank you, Lucy. Fear. What does the business want to measure? Oh, boring but necessary. I love that one, Caroline. That's an interesting point there. typically, these are things that we do hear a lot, from comms friends, from clients, and so you're not alone in how you're feeling here. So we'll hopefully by the end of today give you a little bit of confidence and reassurance. I love that point there. Is it working? Absolutely. Is it impactful? So yes, we get that, and absolutely resonates with us as well. What does good look like? There's a question. So hopefully we'll come onto that a bit later for you. Measurement is, for those of you who aren't aware, the Institute of Internal Communication profession map has 6 professional areas that as internal communicators we look at, and to have within our toolkit to help our people. Measurement is one of those, conducting research, measuring and demonstrating value. I love that last point, demonstrating the value that we give. However, it's not just internal comms, as we know. All the PR and communication disciplines, apply measurement and look to use it to demonstrate their value. However, as we see here, it's about that deliver meaningful insights. And that's what for us measurements is about. It's about the difference we make, and how we're changing the way our organization works and the behaviors within it. However, measurement's a bit of a minefield potentially when it comes to the different languages. For us at All Things IC, we look at we talk about these 4 areas here. So we look at inputs, who are the target audiences? What are some of the resources that we need to deliver our communication activity? So that's things like your budgets, potentially, the channels. What do you have available that's going to input into your communication activity? We hear a lot, and a lot around the outputs. So this is things such as page views, maybe the attendance at a particular event if you're doing a staff or colleague event. And this is often where we fall into a bit of a comfort zone within internal communication. It's often some of the easier things to capture, potentially. Our systems allow us to do page view and those analytics. So even if you are measuring these, remember it's both quantitative and qualitative. So it's some of those stats that we're familiar with, but also it's the thoughts and feelings as well. The magic for us is around that outcomes, though. It's what happens as a result of your communication. So what have you done that's changed the way someone might think, feel, or do around a particular communication activity? And the last point there is about outtakes. So it's the reactions from your audiences when you delivered a particular piece of communication. How attentive were they to your particular campaign? How well did they understand the topic when they were reading the article, watching the video, or attending the town hall? So when it comes to measurement, these are normally the 4 areas that we would look to talk about and make sure that we're embedding throughout all our approach. So next one, keen to understand why you might be avoiding measurement. So again, if you're with us today live, feel free to pop it in the chat. If you're watching this at a later date, again, in your notebook, give yourself that moment just to go, actually, why maybe do I avoid measurement? What is it that perhaps stops you from, doing the measurement that we know is important to us? Hard to measure behavior. It's that hard. We'll come on to that. Talking about those outcomes, like how do we demonstrate the change in behavior, isn't normally a short term, it's often long term. Time, I certainly hear you there. We know that especially in house, you've got a lot going on. There's a lot of pressures to get content, get campaigns out, and time, I appreciate, can be sometimes against there. Again, these are comments that we've heard a lot. So looking now at some of the things that we've heard and seen from other people. On the next slide. Perfect. So things that we often hear about is, actually, where do I start? As Samar said already there, do I have enough time to do that measurement? There's too much pressure to get content out. So the focus is on actually, I've got too much to do and we've got that campaign out, we're on to the next thing. And perhaps our systems make it hard. But we know measurement's key, and it's we pour a lot of time often into our planning of communication and making sure we're delivering it and planning it in the right way. We need to also put that time into our measurement as well, because by having that measurement, it gives us the insights to do even better the next time as well. So we make, like I say, we make time and effort for our content. So 2 top tips from us today that I'd like to leave you with before I hand over to Caroline. Not everything that can be measured matters. Sometimes it can be a bit overwhelming that if you've got maybe intranet that's providing you with lots of stats, maybe it's providing you with heat mapping, maybe it's giving you your insights into comments, likes, and articles. We can often potentially get excited and go, great, we've got all this data and insights. We've got lots of comments from colleagues about how the content resonated with them. What we ask you to do is just stop and pause and just think, what's important to us as a team? How does it fit to our internal communication objectives that we know ladder up and support our business objectives as well? So just keep that top one in mind. Just because you can measure it doesn't always mean it's the right thing to be doing there as well. The second one there is, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. Absolutely. The measurement allows us to take that stock check of our communications and go, actually, what worked, what didn't work, and how do we improve it again? The more frequent we can do that, and fear not, I'm not suggesting every day we apply some of these, but that monthly check-in of actually, let's look back and see, how did that podcast resonate with our colleagues? How did that video message from the CEO land with our people managers? So by understanding what is or isn't working, it means we can improve it. And it's important as well that we aren't afraid to sometimes go, as much as I put time and effort into a particular piece of communication or campaign, if it didn't work, that's okay. As long as we recognize it didn't work, we understand why, and we change it going forward, that's what we're looking for within measurement.
Thank you, Dan. So far, Dan has given you the lowdown on what measurement is and why it's so important, being one of those core sort of pillars of every communicator's role. And also talked about the reasons why people don't do it. And I'm loving some of the things in the chat. One of the last things in there, the comment, no one reads that anyway. And Alex has jumped in saying that's always a crushing one, that those sort of things happen. And there can be that real fear of, what if we hear the truth and it's not what we want to hear? And what if we can't demonstrate that impact? So we totally hear you. So anyway, let's look at what can be measured. And the things on here are a mixture of outputs and outcomes. So, as Dan said, things like readership, attendance, page views, that stuff is important and relevant, but not unless it tells you something. So these are just ideas. It's not a perfect list. They are not all going to be relevant. Some are going to be easier to do than others. So there's no real blueprint for every organization and team. I think that's important to say. There are lots of models out there, but you will have the right things for you. I think one thing I would say, though, if you are only tracking clicks and attendance and reads and those sort of things, it's useful to know that stuff, but it has to tell you something. So you really need to take a step back and think, what do we actually want to know? So I'm going to look at measurement mistakes, which picks up on the last chat. So pencil at the ready. Here we go. So what mistakes do you think people make when it comes to measurement? So you've given us some good chat ideas so far, but what do you think? Where do you think people go wrong with measurement? Thank you, Rachel. Any other ideas? Yeah, great. Thank you, Gemma. Oh, we've got a flurry. Yes, brilliant. Yeah. Yeah, basing success on views is never a good look, Dylan. I totally agree with you. Perfect. Well, you're all completely on board with this, which is marvelous. So this is probably the slide I'll spend the longest amount of time on. These are some of the common things that we see often, and you know, we've all worked in-house, and now we're consultants. We have a real privilege of looking at casting our lens into lots of different teams, and these are things we see often. So people not measuring anything at all is always a bit of a red flag. And I think sometimes people say, well, we want to measure, but our intranet's got terrible analytics, or we want to measure, but you know, I'm sort of blaming a lack of functionality and a channel almost for stopping the measurement, which isn't really measuring even. That isn't really an excuse. You can always ask someone, walk up to a desk or pop a chat in Teams and say, what did you think of that? Did you understand the message, or how did you find that event? So there's always a way of gathering views. Measuring the wrong thing, I think being really hung up on the outputs rather than what it's actually telling you is another sort of mistake that we see. I think the third one is so important. We've said not turning stats into action, but I think it's not turning stats into stories and then action in actual fact. So, you know, if people are giving you feedback and you can triangulate that with some stats, brilliant. So as Dan said, some qualitative and quantitative data, but what is it actually telling you? Only measuring output is quite common, not focusing on outcomes, obviously tied into the same thing. Leaving everything to the end, that's another good one. It's like, actually, can you measure as you go? So it's not this Herculean task that you think, I've not got a day to work out whether that thing that I did, that campaign, that event or whatever was successful. It's actually, can you just build measurement and feedback very gently and naturally into the process so it doesn't become sort of a separate task? And then not time measurement into objectives. And I'd probably add a few more in. I was like reflecting on this again last night based on recent conversations. And another one I'd add in is measuring things to justify the existence of the team. I always find slightly worrying too. You don't have to measure to prove why you're there, but it absolutely helps if you can turn those stats into stories. And, you know, someone said before, it's hard to demonstrate behavior change. Absolutely. And Dan quite rightly said, those are the sort of things, culture change, behavior change, they take a long time. And a comms team is one piece of the puzzle. There's so many different factors involved. But never really hide behind measurement to justify why the team is there. But it's really useful to have stats and stories in your top pocket. But I think the number one for me mistake is not using measurement and insights to make decisions. I know some of the people that we work with say we're really busy, we've got no time, we're lacking resources, we're just basically reacting and doing, and we don't have time to think and plan. And that is very common. You know, we've all been there, and many people will be thinking that that's actually my life now. But actually, I think being brave and taking a step back and thinking, every week I'm going to get some feedback, or every week I'm going to find out how something went and help it inform what I do next week. Even if that's the starting point, that's better than not taking a step at all. So, okay, let's move on to the next slide. So what have we done in this session? We've given you a definition of measurement, and we've told you why it's important. We've asked you why people don't measure. We've talked about measurement mistakes. Dan has talked about measure what you treasure and the language of measurement. So we've given you a real snapshot, but it has been a quick dive in. What we hope you've got is one thing to know. So probably the key one for us would be the difference between outputs and outcomes. One thing to do, actually sit down as an individual or as a team and think what matters to us. So don't get bogged down with, well, what do we think people expect us to measure? That's important, and it's an important part of the conversation, but actually what matters to you. And that might be as simple as, this month we intend to do X, and then the following month you say, did we do it? What helped us achieve or partly achieve that? What got in the way? And what lessons can we learn for next time? And actually, if you work it in that way and talk in that language in the team, that's a healthy measurement and evaluation culture that you have. So don't feel it's all about stats and matrices and Excel spreadsheets and analytics. They are part of the picture. And when I first started my slide with the different things you can measure, I said there's no perfect combination for any team or organization. So it's measure what you treasure and what's important to you and what's going to help you learn and make better decisions. I guess that's what I would say. I would always come back to, what can you learn and what can you use that learning to do to inform things in the future. And then finally, one thing to think about, which ties in, what's your approach to measurement? You may be more evaluation led, feedback led. Just take some time to think it through. Maybe write a few 2-3 bullet points in your notebook at the end of this session and think, I'm actually going to spend 10 minutes this week giving this a little bit of thought. Okay, so in the world of all things IC, there is always a blog, there is always a podcast, and I know Rachel's watching and will be giggling now. So these are just some of our resources, and we've used QR codes to make it simple as possible. So we have a link to our blogs, we have a link to our podcasts, and we have got some measurement resources and new products and services coming out soon, because it's such an important topic and one that teams increasingly ask for our help on. So we've got an online masterclass which is just being polished at the moment and tested and will be live in a matter of weeks. And Dan is also leading some in-person measurement masterclasses at the All Things IC Hub in Ealing in London shortly. So please check out those links if you're interested in those support, the types of support we can offer you. But we're not the only people that offer these supports and resources. We've got another slide here. So we've got some CIPR resources, some government communication services resources, and we've also got some resources from the International Association for the Measurement and Evaluation of Communication. And there's some brilliant things there. But, you know, pick one and just take some time to look at it. There's tons of things there, but I will plug our own podcast for if you want to go for a nice half-hour walk or make a cup of tea, have your lunch and listen to Rachel talk about measurement. That will give you some really accessible, thought-provoking ideas. Okay, so for commsHERO folk, we have a special offer. We've got a QR code here. So use the code use the commsHERO 2022 code on allthingsic.thinkific.com, and you can claim 15% off the cost of online masterclasses. That's valid till the end of the year, so there's still quite a good chunk of time. So please check out what's on offer there. And we've actually got to the last slide. Before we ask this question, though, I will plug the prize draw. Again, the All Things IC Stationery Bundle. If you've taken something away from this session, please pop a message on Twitter or on socials. We're all on different social channels, and we'll look at what you've done. And today we'll draw a random prize for someone who, you know, puts a photo of the session, a takeaway from the session, and tags in the session. So if you do that, commsHERO will retweet it. You'll be with a better chance of winning the bundle, and people love the stationery, so it's definitely worth doing it. So can we end our session with some chat and questions? So what's been the most useful thing you've learned today? If you've got any questions, pop them in the chat and Dan and I will do our best to help you.
So there's one question in the Q&A that I'll come back to in a sec. I'm just going to jump back to an earlier question point that was made. He says, so try and get back. What does the business want me to measure? I think Stevie kindly put that in when we talked about measure. I think that's an absolutely key question, is understanding, first of all, who your stakeholders that are interested in your insights, that, you know, and what decisions do they want to make from your insights, importantly, because the last thing we want to do is spend all this time doing our evaluation and measurement, creating dashboards and reports. Well, what are they going to do with it? How's it informing their decision? But I think you're right, it's having those conversations internally about actually what does the business want to measure, but importantly, why do they want to measure that? So you can be smart with your time, because remember, it's about showing the changes that we're able to make from our measurement. So I think if we always ask that question up front first, before we start even thinking about where do I go, what do I measure, that gives you that nice focus about actually, yeah, each month, what we're going to capture, what are we going to look at as well. So, you know, great point raised there.
Amazing stuff. Well, yeah, thanks very much, Dan and Caroline. I'd like to let's try and give everyone a virtual round of applause for them. And I was going to say, we have got some questions coming in. Question here from Omar Al-Soma, who I noticed is dialing all the way in from Sudan. So thank you, Omar. And his question is, how to filter your measurements?
Oh, I'm going to be, and please correct me if I'm wrong in my interpretation here of the question. I take the question as if we've got all different sources of measurement, and how do we understand which is the right one to apply is kind of how I interpret that. But again, feel free to use the chat or Q&A. It comes back to my point, I think, just there about actually what's important for you as an individual or team to know, and what can you importantly change. So by that, I mean, if you're putting time into, let's say, 3-month communication campaign, let's say around well-being, diversity, sustainability, obviously we've got a lot of potentially statistics and insights that we can pull in. So it's coming back nicely to your communication objectives of what did I set out to achieve? What did I want my colleagues to think differently about? How do I want them to feel as a result of this campaign? Or what do I want them to do differently after that 3 months of activity? I think then it's going, okay, what measures will tell me how the communication has been performing, and then just focusing on those bits. Like I say, we talked earlier about, you can't, just because we can measure everything doesn't mean we should. And I think it's just picking up some of those key metrics, whether that's insights from colleagues, like what they've said to you, what you've heard, whether it's things like your statistics around internet views, so the outputs. I think it's just going, actually, what's the important metric? What's going to give me that insight, and just focus on those. If that isn't quite what you meant, feel free to pop it in the chat, and I'll make sure we pick it up after today as well.
Amazing. Well, we do have a bit more time for a few more questions if anyone wants to pop them in the Q&A tab. I guess a question from me would be, do you have any recommended tools that you would use to measure these metrics?
Definitely, I would check out AMEC. So they've got a couple of resources there. They've got their Barcelona principles that are very good. If you haven't got anything in place, it's a very good start point. Now, they are quite more the wider communication discipline, but I think it will give you a nice start point to go, okay, this is what we as a team can set out to achieve. They've also got a very good framework and a good interactive tool, actually, that lets you put in things like your inputs, your outputs, your outcomes, and can visually help. Also, a couple of years back, the CIPR Inside and also IOIC did a joint a bit of activity and produced back in 2019 a report that contains various different frameworks and models. And my advice to you is pick and choose out of that what works and what doesn't. One size doesn't always fit all. And they did a nice one-page metric of actually how do you measure outputs and outcomes, so like the kind of questions you might want to ask in surveys. So again, they're kind of two resources that I would kind of definitely worth a look, all in the public domain as well, so everyone can easily access those, and we'll share some links later actually to those as well for you.
Okay, amazing. Cool. We've just had another question come in from Alex Harvey, so Senior Employee Communication Advisor from QBEEO. And he says, certain measurements are pretty straightforward to present, charts and graphs, etc. But what would you recommend for verbal or written feedback when presenting to stakeholders? He's been trialing a word cloud with their results so far.
If I can just jump in on that one, I know certainly the way we sort of approach, often we're asked, say, if we're auditing organisations, we're asked, well, can you look at point X, Y, and Z, and prove whether people are doing this or that, and actually all sorts of other things filter in, and people say things. So we normally sort of approach it with actually what's top of mind for people, what are the things that they're thinking about, they're lying awake at night worrying about, they're talking about. So what are those water cooler conversations? And we just sort of say, these are the things that the themes or the topics or the questions that we're hearing. And then if they don't directly relate to what you were actually trying to measure or evaluate, you then sort of, you then present what you were actually trying to do. So I wouldn't hide those things. And I think it's also important that if you've asked people for feedback or they've input into measurement and they've raised other topics, that you're quite transparent when you play it back. And it's like, this was the answer to the question we asked you, but you also raised these really important points. So yeah, we are all for the no holes barred, no censored, this is what people are saying, view, because we actually think as communicators we've got a sort of a responsibility, I guess, to hold the lens up to the organisation at times and sort of say this is what's actually going on. And I think leaders and other stakeholders might not always like the things that you come back with, but they probably appreciate it because you're closer to the ground, you're closer to what people are saying and how honest they're going to be. So I think it's always a really useful lens to just sort of feel brave and play back what people have said.
I'm going to quickly chip in there, although I know we're tight on time. It's just had, I think the other thing in terms of the presenting is, Alex, is around maybe themes. So actually, if rather than trying to capture every quote or bit of insight, it's also those themes. Like, are there common themes that are coming out? And you can then just use some of the quotes to highlight the points. So if the themes maybe colleagues don't feel they have a voice in terms of two-way communication, that's your theme, and then you can give a couple of examples, perhaps in the presentation, to kind of show that point as well.
Okay, great. So I think we've probably got time for one last question. So this question comes from Andrew Gledhill, comes to marketing from Broadacres. He says, bigger numbers are not always good. Example, more time spent on a website may mean visitors can't find something. Does this make the storytelling the most important aspect?
I think I would say in that instance, Andrew, and I used to work in housing, so I can sort of almost step into your shoes there. You are absolutely right. Just because something's got lots of numbers and people are navigating around, it doesn't automatically mean that they're finding it easy, but they might be. So I think that's where it's that blend of what's the qualitative and the quantitative data. And, is there any way that via, say, a contact center or people that are directly in touch with customers, they can just ask questions. And you know what, it doesn't always have to be in a really scientific way and you've got 50 people were asked and 35 said this and 15 said that. Sometimes that anecdotal feedback is quite useful to get to the heart of the matter. But storytelling isn't the most important aspect, but if you can't tell any stories from stats and measures and insights, then that is concerning. So I would say you've always got to sort of be able to at least inform something, even if you're not quite telling a story. So I do think you need to think about both sides of the same coin.
Amazing. Well, thank you once again, Caroline and Dan, for a really insightful and interactive presentation. We are going to be starting back again with the next session in 10 minutes time. But if you have any more questions for Dan and Caroline, I'm sure you'll be able to find them either in the networking or you can drop them a message through the platform. Thanks again.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.